And this is the Afros and Eyes podcast, the interview series that elevates the stories of Black women and women of color working in food and beverage, hospitality, and food media.
My name is Nyanyika Banda. I'm a chef, I'm a writer, I'm a culinary educator, and an entrepreneur. I currently have started a new project called Mid.dle Passage, which is an immersive dining experience celebrating the diaspora of African peoples through food and music and art and word. Before that, I had a restaurant in northern Minnesota called Martha's Daughter that won lots of accolades, but ultimately I decided to close, and so I'm currently in a journey of discovering where my place is outside of the restaurant, but still in the culinary world. I am 38 years old. I've been working in restaurants since I was 15, so I've been in the industry for about 22 years. I got my first job mostly because I was a teacher looking to make some money, but I ended up working for a small family-owned business in Madison, Wisconsin called North American Rotisserie, and it was a small Black-owned family. There was two brothers and a sister, and I got to work at the counter and do some prep, and that definitely really piqued my interest in culinary, and I've just been working my way up the ranks in the culinary world ever since.
I am going to be selfish and ask you a bit more about your current project. I was like, okay, well, like we can all go back and read some information and like talk about that in a minute. But when it popped up on my Instagram, I was like, I'm sorry, what's this? What's going on here? And I didn't connect you to it initially until I tagged you, and I was like, hey, I want to interview about this. You're like, I'm already interviewing you. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. I just didn't realize that was you. So like, talk to me about like where that idea came from and like what you're hoping to get done and like any kind of like everything you're going to start with and like ways that people can like participate, get involved, spread the word, or that kind of thing.
I was so excited when I found out about you and your project, because basically I had been living in northern Minnesota going to school. I had returned after like getting my associate's degree in culinary arts, and I worked in California, and I was working in New York City, and I ended up doing an internship at Silver Magazine where they gave me the opportunity to write along with testing recipes, and so I got really interested in like the editorial side of food. So I went back to school, and while I was a student, I was going to a really small state school that didn't offer like a food studies program, so I decided to kind of curate my own degree, and within my interest in history and food, I did a lot of study on like foodways of the African diaspora and got really interested in food history, especially of like Black food. And there were some important voices in there, like Jessica B. Harris and Tony Tipton and Dr. Fregelis Opie, who have done a lot of really intensive research on like the history of Black food, but there's still just like a really large gap in terms of the stories that are being told about our people and stories that are being recorded. And I was in a really small town that was 96% white, and I was starting to really feel the disconnect between like me and my identity as a Black person, as a Black culinarian. And so ultimately my decision to close my restaurant was partly because I felt like I needed more diversity in my life, and I really needed to be connecting with people who looked like me, who had similar experiences to me, or who we could share our experiences together. So when I closed my restaurant, I spent the past 6 months actually traveling the country. I got hooked up with the traveling pop-up group Outstanding in the Field, and they do farm-to-table dinners all across the world. And so I had the opportunity to work dinners on about 60 different farms across the country. And while it was really great to see people connecting to the farmers and the chefs in their community, there was still like not the presence of people of color there. And so I just saw that there was like this need to connect people to, Black farmers. And once I started doing more research about Black farmers in this country, I started to learn that there's just been this ultimate decline, which makes no real sense considering we created farming in this country. And, I just kind of want to create a space for Black people and people of African descent to really celebrate our culture and to really kind of like reconnect to where we came from and like the beautiful things that we contributed to this country.
Absolutely. I mean, that was kind of what I've noticed is happening as not necessarily, I can't, the word trend is the wrong word for that, but that idea of like rediscovering food history overall. And I think as the culture as a whole starts to rediscover like where food comes from, they're starting to notice that there are a lot of Black and brown faces in that history that they did not realize, which is typical of history in general at this point, especially in this country.
And we just, we just came through Black History Month, and while it's amazing to be retelling the stories of, Black culinarians who have paved the way for us, we start kind of telling the story of like the same 6 to 10 people. And obviously there were like so many more people contributing, and it's important that, for us and for the future, that we start to really like record what's going on and like, give our voices space to be heard.
Exactly. And it's, I wanted to circle back to a point you had made about like creating your own education or like your own program essentially for yourself, because it's just not something that's being offered in a traditional school or class environment at this point. What did that look like for you? Like I think it's an interesting thing to share, especially with like young people who are coming up who don't know how to fill the holes in their culinary education, especially with things that, cuisines that they're interested in but don't get covered in a traditional culinary school environment. So what was your approach to just essentially educating yourself and giving yourself the foundations and tools that you needed to kind of pursue where you're going next?
Well, my approach to my degree was, I guess I was fortunate because I had a culinary degree and I had established myself as a chef. And so I felt like I had the freedom to really just enjoy like education and learning. And I had a really great mentor / advisor who really encouraged me to dive deep, and they also were very interested in food. So, I guess one thing is to definitely find a mentor or an advisor or a program where there are people that are equally interested in food and really want to be able to encourage you, and maybe they're doing their own research. I was able to find a professor that was of Malaysian descent, and he was doing his own research on Chinese American food, and so that kind of inspired me to take my own path and start looking more into my relationship with soul food. And my father's Malawian and my mother's Black American, and so I didn't actually grow up with traditional Black soul food traditions or foods. And so for me, kind of being able to eat out food, Black food culture, and to connect with it and the history, and to see that I have a lot more in common was really kind of helped inspire me to keep going with the degree. And also just I think with anything in life, believing in yourself. And I have kind of always heard no, and no, I've now kind of transitioned into that, meaning I challenge you to prove me wrong. Even in the beginning of my culinary degree, I was told that I couldn't be a cook because I was a woman, and that inspired me to, prove that person wrong. And so if someone says to me, oh, we don't offer this degree, well, why not? Someone's doing it somewhere, or someone should be doing it. And so I definitely have always kind of tried to have that. Maya Angelou has a quote that says, I am human, therefore anything human I can do. And my mother told me that when I was discouraged from being a line cook, and I've held on to that quote my whole life. And it's definitely helps me to stand up to those naysayers and to really keep pursuing the things that I believe in.
It's, because I'm pro formal education. I'm also pro self-education. So that's why that stuck out to me, because I think a lot of times, because there is a lack of pursuing those particular other food ways outside of traditional European ones or French ones, they essentially they set the standard as French cooking is the standard, and it's kind of but really is it? Can we talk about some other places in the world that cook? It's all cultures cook, so how is it that this one particular one has kind of emerged as the standard? And it's good. I don't know if it's great, but it's good. It works. It brings structure to life in a kitchen sometimes. But I'm definitely more interested.
Well, it's also interesting to see. I have cooked with my Malawian aunts, and there are a lot of cooking techniques that they use that are very similar to the techniques that I was learning in a fine dining kitchen. And so I'm also working on projects kind of trying to connect more with the Malawian African side of food. But in regards to formal education, before I opened my restaurant, I was actually pursuing a doctoral program in studying African foodways. And so I like first had to find schools that offered ideally any sort of like African American food history, which is still like limited and not necessarily available at every university. And then to find people that are also interested in seeing food that expands beyond just like Southern soul food is still really challenging. And I guess that was like an area that I wanted to keep exploring. And that's why I really wanted to study African foodways, because there, like I said earlier, there's like people, scholars who are like paving the way and doing the research, but there's like so many different paths to go down. The same as European food, the same way we've studied, you know, the way that, yeah, the French have influenced cultures all over the world, like Africans have done the same.
What has been in your current study, what has been the most surprising thing that you've discovered about like African foodways that you just didn't expect to uncover or didn't expect to find?
You know, I grew up in the Northeast, and like I said, to African parents, and so my knowledge of soul food was very, very limited, and I had this idea of kind of like fried foods, lots of meat. For a long time in my 20s, I was vegetarian, and so I just felt like we're disconnected to soul food. And as I started researching more about how, like, you know, the enslaved Africans were farmers and they were bringing seeds over, and that there's so many, pretty much all of these vegetables that we consume today were brought by slaves. And, you know, just really acknowledging the influence that Africans had in cooking for white people and turning them onto the foods that now are like traditional American foods. When I was younger, the only real examples I saw of Black women in the kitchen were, you know, as a servant. And so I didn't really understand that, you know, how much of an impact we really have had on like American food culture, like, you know, kale and potatoes and beans and cultivating rice. I mean, there's just so many things that we brought this country and figured out how to make industry. That, I mean, there's so much to be learned that I still don't even know that I want to keep learning about. And that's why I think sharing the story is really important, you know. It's been I've gotten a really great response from not just Black farmers, but from like generational Black farmers in the country. And, you know, hearing their stories of land and hearing about, you know, grandparents who were sharecroppers and worked to be able to purchase land so that their children could have it. And these are like such important stories. And I have been passionate about like local farming, supporting organic farming, like whole foods, and to really be able to
I love the name, and I wanted to, when I saw it pop up on Instagram, I definitely wanted to spend a little time like just talking with you about like where the name came from, because I love the name. I loved the name Martha's Daughter. That definitely was like it kind of spoke for itself almost. But like the middle passage, and like specifically like how you how it's spelled, like how it's actually written. What was the inspiration behind just the name of that?
I mean, I've always been, I think, a little bit triggered by the term Middle Passage and what it means just for Black history. But as I've gotten older and have, you know, had certain life experiences or challenges or tests, you know, as a human, as a Black person, as a woman, I realized that we all still are kind of going through this journey, and we all have these points in our lives where perhaps they are maybe something similar to that same Middle Passage. And, you know, there are a lot of parts of history that are really horrible. And I think as Black people, we've done a really good job of taking ownership of those things and making them our own. And for me, I realized, you know, even I kind of searched out like, well, are other people using the term Middle Passage? And it's still something that maybe it's taboo. Maybe we're like too scared to talk about, but it's like a very real part of our history. But it's something that, you know, we can be celebrating all the great things that have come from this like Middle Passage / diaspora that happened as a result of slavery. We are in a time that is not easy for people of color right now, you know, and it's and so I think that we all have this journey that we're going on, and to really be able to, again, like share in our experiences. And, you know, what I love about food, and I actually was reading this in your blog, you were talking about this, about like sharing food and like sitting at a table together. I mean, that's like what I love about cooking, and what I loved when I was doing pop-ups and supper clubs, and what I love about my most recent position traveling is just seeing people who are strangers sit down together, share a meal, and like leave as friends and like enjoy an experience together. And that's just what I continue to do as much as possible. Opening of the restaurant actually came as like not a planned part of my life trajectory. As I said, I was applying to grad schools, and I actually was doing food writing, and I had my own monthly column in the Duluth News Tribune where I was able to, you know, incorporate food history and recipes I enjoyed. But because I was doing a pop-up and I developed this following, the restaurant just kind of fell into my lap, and I decided to go with that. So, but ultimately, it's kind of like I'm in the industry for so long that it kind of just continuously pulls me back, and I'm really trying to give myself the freedom to step away from the traditional restaurant space and to, pursue writing, which is something I'm really interested in. I've been, since the new year, sending out pitches and have some essays in the works with some national publications, which I'm really excited about. And so just like pursuing food in other realms and trying to give myself the freedom to be comfortable in those areas that are a little bit less comfortable for me. So yes, doing more pop-ups. This summer I'm planning, I've already been connecting with a handful of farms across the country. So my hope is to set up 6 to 10 farm dinners on farms that are either owned or run by people of color, featuring chefs of color, winemakers, and, being able to incorporate art and music into that as well. And just really, like I said, when I reached out to you this summer, it's about, I'm really interested in like creating a community or finding that community of folks like me. And so that's really my mission right now in life.
Oh, awesome. And I completely get the pivot. Like I was actively working in restaurants, on a line and other actively cooking in a lot of positions. And then in the last couple of years, just physically my feet were like, hey, we're ready to not do this anymore. So,
it's for the young people.
Exactly. I was like, oh, I can't do that anymore. So it was really, I feel you. I was like, how am I doing this? Like, I love what I do. I love the food space. Like, how can I continue to work in it and not, end up in the bed somewhere or under the bed right. For that matter. Definitely that pivot into like food writing and education and stuff just feels definitely like a natural evolution, that kind of position of like, once you've been in it for a number of years, now it's time to like kind of disseminate that information that you've learned and attained, and then of course chase your own growing curiosities and to see what you don't know and figure out what else there is to know, because of course, and anyone who's worked in a restaurant understands that your life really isn't your own for most of that time. You spend obscene amounts of hours in a building with the same people every single day, and your life just kind of ticks away.
Exactly.
And so when you do get some freedom, you kind of go, I want to do all the things that I had no time to do before, and it's a lot. It has backlogged quite a bit. So like at this point, like is there any place where we can dig into some of your writing? Is there like a blog we can all put some eyes on? Because I would love to definitely like read whatever you want to put out there for sure.
In that same vein, I ended up starting and working for a friend in her restaurant that they just opened in Los Angeles for the past like month and a half, and then I just had to give myself like a slap on the wrist to remind myself this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be writing and doing other things. So I'm actually heading to the desert to start doing some real intensive writing and to really put the project of Mid.dle Passage out there. So right now I'd say like following on social media, so following Mid.dle Passage, Mid.dle Passage on Instagram, and then also following Martha's Daughter. There's going to be like 2 places where I'm going to be doing a lot more food history writing and blogging. And then I've been working on some pop-ups as well, like collaborations. And I'm definitely looking to collaborate with as many other folks as possible who want to reach out.
Okay, awesome. In your study at this point, are there any resources like books and things like that you recommend that people just might not be reading that are not necessarily on the radar right now? Because there's a lot of like tremendous work being done by a lot of fantastic writers and historians, and and there's some older work as well that people have rediscovered. But has there been anything that's just been particularly influencing?
I guess these 3 folks I would say are definitely more on the academic side. The presence on social media isn't as out there, so I think folks might not be like as aware, but I would say that they're definitely the like 4 leaders of the African foodways like discussion in terms of like the academic setting. And so that would be like Dr. Frederick Douglass Opie, OPIE, Dr. Jessica B. Harris, and Tony Tipton Martin are like 3 folks who, especially when I was doing my research, their names just came up over and over and over again as the people who are kind of like the authorities of African foodways. And I know Tony Tipton has recently come out with a new book, Jubilee, that is diving really deep into Black history in terms of food. I believe she's on a book tour right now, possibly. But those are people that I would say have really inspired me.
Yeah. Yep. And I kind of touched on this question a little bit with the folks at Black Food Folks. In your rediscovery and discovery of the past and of history, where do you see the future of Black food going? I think it's a strange thing to be a Black person, especially in the United States, because we have to be so focused on the past because it hasn't resolved itself yet, and a lot of it has found its way into the future and into the present. So it's hard. We don't get the luxury of future casting for ourselves. We don't get to look ahead and go, this is what it looks like to work as a Black person in tech, and this is what it looks like to work as a Black person in food. So we don't get space often to like really look at the future and go, this is what we want, this is where we're headed. So with you having worked in a restaurant space recently, as well as like studying, the work and food of our past, how do you see the future looking for Black food and Black foodways?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely that we're not really given a lot of space to expand further. I mean, I had a regular at my restaurant, bless his soul, but every time he came in, he would talk to me about boiled peanuts. And I was just like, I've never even really had boiled peanuts. Like, I understand that it's like a traditional Southern food, but it's not like part of who I am. And it was clear to me that these people like wanted me to be telling like some sort of a story. And that has really been, the kind of journey that I've been on in terms of like understanding that looking to the past is not necessarily a bad thing. And, I think connecting with it even deeper will help us to really identify what is Black food. And it doesn't have to be this kind of, direct relation to the Jim Crow South and to slavery. It can have like all of these different avenues in which it expands. Like you and I we've worked in kitchens that do food that isn't just Black food. And, I've had a hard time being able to tell people that my style of food maybe isn't just a certain type of way. And sorry, I'm going on like a long tangent, but I think that I mean, it's just been really great to see how other Black culinarians are, like the honeysuckle pop-up, like are really kind of like connecting back to history. And I think, as I was saying, in terms of like the triggering nature of Mid.dle Passage, or even, for myself living in predominantly white spaces where like I had to be extra conscious of my Blackness, that it's almost like first we have to get super Black so that we can kind of move forward and create like a new space for ourselves, and like you said, I think there's like a lot of reconciling that has to happen, and I think a lot of it has to just do with like letting our voices be heard and putting them out there, and not letting them be quieted down, and not being told that like we have to fit into this certain space, but really like creating that space for ourselves.
This is true. And it's funny because like after my sister works in theater, and I have some other friends who work in other industries, and this idea of having to be like 200% Black at the top in order to be allowed to be a regular person at some point where you can strike a balance. It's like, why do I have to be like ultra Black in order for you to be okay with what I'm doing right now? Like, is it, like if I don't fry chicken in my restaurant, like, hello, that doesn't reduce but I'm not trying to be Black, I am. So no matter what happens and what I produce out of this kitchen, I'm still a Black chef producing food from a Black-led kitchen. Like, I think I recently read like the challenges behind the brand Honey Pot from Target, and the advertisement for that. And then recently there's a really cool smartphone app called Eat Okra, which essentially was started by a couple in New York that helps people find Black-owned food businesses across the country. And so they're ramping up a lot of their marketing, and so the word is spreading, and because the app is beautiful, and I just think it's necessary. You can, as a Black-owned food business, can get on there, register your business, so that when people are in a city or in an area, they can find you. And so they're recently getting Yeah, exactly. And so it's a really beautiful app. I've been like, anytime I can tell somebody about it, I'm like, just download the app. If you want to support Black businesses like that, you have to find us first. And it's a great way to find them. But like between the two, like they both recently have had some really interesting pushback because of that idea of, well, if we as non-Black people were to promote our businesses as the way you guys are doing it, then we would be considered racist. And it's just still like wrestling with this idea that, yeah, we want you to be Black people, but we still don't want you to exist though. It's like like they want the best of both worlds. Very specific way. Exactly. There's got to be a very specific narrative about it. So it's like, okay, so would you go to a Black owned business if you knew they were Black owned? Most people are like, well, I don't care. I'm like, but think about that. Like, would you really think about how you treat other cultures as well? You make assumptions about a lot of different cultures and about a lot of their businesses, like the assumption of Asian restaurants serving, domesticated animals and, like stuff like that. And like, Mexican tacos not having like real meat in them, like just foolishness essentially. But it's like, so if people don't, if these cultures don't push back, including ourselves, and like re-educate and correct these issues, what's the expectation? For me, I'm just like, so we are going to allow you to continue to think that we exist in this way, or that we're not, like, why have because I'm always like, why have an issue with it to begin with? Like, so what? Someone's saying like, it's a Black owned business, because the default isn't. So we have to now make a distinction. I'm like, if we were part of the general narrative, no, we wouldn't be sitting out here trying to make a distinction, but we have to.
Exactly. And the real issue is, and that's something that I've kind of came to realization living where I was for the past 5 years, is, there comes a point where my problems aren't the same as other people's problems, and my issues aren't the same as others. And, I took a lot of responsibility on, I was maybe 2 Black people who owned a business in a city of 89,000 people. And so I felt like a lot of pressure to, be a upstanding Black citizen and be an example for folks, because I have people where I lived, telling me that the only Black people that they had ever seen were on television when I first moved up there. And so to know that like how I behave in front of these folks really is a representation of like a whole culture. At one point in my life, on that responsibility, and then especially after Trump got elected, and just kind of seeing people kind of be outright bigoted, it kind of made me really understand that our struggle is still very real, and we really, if we aren't taking care of ourselves, no one else is going to do it for us. And that's really been the catalyst for me. And I have to almost even like recheck myself in that when I kind of find myself maybe even like apologizing to white folks, or trying to make them feel more comfortable. That's like not my job. And like my job is to make sure that there are other young Black girls that feel that they can like have a voice, and that they can as cliche as it sounds, be whoever they want to be. Because when I was younger, I didn't see Black women as chefs. It didn't occur to me that I could be a chef. I was just someone that liked cooking and just kind of fell into it organically, but it was never, I didn't see anyone that looked like me, so I could say like I want to aspire to be like them. And to me, it's really important now. I mean, it's like become this cliched term almost about representation, but it's like so important, and it's important for the people in our community, whether they're young or old, that we can see a version of ourselves in someone else.
It's true, and it's funny to me that people who aren't challenged with this particular issue are like, I don't like it. They would not understand it. It's like, you're represented everywhere. You show up in every space as the default. And so for it to have to constantly concern yourself with like, okay, how are we represented? How are we showing up? Like, that conversation is hard to have with people who won't ever have that experience. Unless they go to a foreign country and they're the only person like themselves. And even in that, because they don't live there, it's a really different attitude. It's like, well, I'm only visiting. And so even, in those spaces, it can be a bit of a kind of an ego trip. Well, yes, I'm the only one that looks like me. And so, it's this great thing because you're not being, abused or dehumanized for it. You're being, people are curious, and that. Exactly. And people are curious, and that's about as far as it goes. And so when people are like, well, I don't get it, I don't understand, I'm like, well, you don't live an experience. It's like trying to, explain pregnancy and labor and delivery to a man. It's just like, well, you don't have the biologically you don't have the parts for this particular job, and so it's hard to explain it to you where you can actually understand the experience like you would if you were experiencing it firsthand. And so, at this point when you're like, okay, we to ramp up the activity at this point, to put ourselves in positions, because again, like you said, it's not our jobs now to like make people comfortable with the fact that I'm here. We are here, so it's up to you now to just accept it or reject it, but I'm not going anywhere. So I'm gonna we're gonna put ourselves where we need to be so other people who look like us can understand that they're invited. I think that's what people don't understand about inclusion and representation. It's about you knowing that there's an invitation for you, because you don't want to go where you're not wanted. But if you see someone like yourself in a place, you kind of go, oh, okay, we're invited to be in that space, so I can at least imagine myself there or pursue work in that area. So, but yeah, see, this is why I mean by you can go on a tangent real easy up and around here. So now the theme of the season for me was like growth and wellness. And I, thinking about like your journey at this point, at least publicly, like what people have read and things like that. And of course, like help understanding your story, especially like closing the restaurant and things like that. And then like where you are now, what what your intentions were in the beginning at all. Like this was not the thing I had on my life plan on my life map to begin with. And, it just is an opportunity that presented itself that I took. I've seen a lot of like just restaurant closures and that can be for a number of things, economy and a couple of other things. And my question for you is like, how did you take care of yourself in that transition, in that space? Because, for me, I'm like, even if it wasn't my intention to do something, I want to do something well and I want to succeed at it for as long as I choose to do it. And so when I see like, okay, this isn't working the way I wanted to, and then having to just come to a place where I have to make a decision for myself, like, hey, I'm going to let this go so I can do and pursue something else. It's still letting go of something. And so how did you take care of yourself in the process, in the transition, and like to like guard your head and your heart and everything else, just so you were like healthy coming out on the other side, so you could like really definitely like just go forward?
The transition of closing the restaurant actually was super like rushed and kind of chaotic for me, and so I didn't totally have a real plan. I knew that I wanted to go closer to my family, and they all live on the East Coast in Massachusetts, so that was like the first step was, I packed up my apartment and my cat and I drove cross country, and we stayed with my mom and my sister and my grandmother a little while. And ultimately it was like serendipity that had my paths crossed with Outstanding in the Field, because to be honest, I was in a headspace where I felt like I was a failure, and that to have made the decision to close a restaurant, was me letting people down, letting myself down, and I was having a lot of difficulty sitting with that. And so I was able to join this group of people that are really passionate about food systems, and to be able to like be going to so many different farms across the country, and with every different dinner there was a new chef that I was meeting that either was running a restaurant. I met a lot of chefs that were closing restaurants. I met a lot of like female chefs that were also kind of, in a transition of, I thought I wanted to open a restaurant. I thought I wanted to be an executive chef, and then I was burnt out, and then I hated my life. And so then I closed it, and now I'm trying to figure it out. And it was really, again, like when you're finding your team, finding your tribe, it made it feel so much better for me. It made it feel okay. It made like the closing feel okay. And I was able to just really find a community of folks who have had all similar experiences. So I know actually how I would be in terms of headspace had I not had that chance to really kind of be on the road and really like see the country. It was a total blessing.
It's funny because we talk so much about like kind of pursuing those particular types of aspirations, opening a restaurant or, starting something big in this space. And it's very, very few of us get a chance or space to talk about like when something doesn't work out well. And I think that's something that's necessary for, the future generations of people coming up into the space, is that you have to understand like when to let something go, how to process that, like surrounding yourself with people who like get you and who understand where you're at and who can give you space and time. Go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about this. The weekend, it was like right after I had announced that I was closing my restaurant, was the National Women's Chef and Restaurateurs Conference. And that year and the year before, they'd been hosted in Minneapolis. The year before, I'd actually been invited to like cook food for the conference. And that was my first introduction to WCRA. And from the first year, and then showing up there after closing a restaurant, and there were panels with esteemed female restaurateurs who had similar experiences and, you know, still have other restaurants that are like succeeding or they've moved on and done other things. And going to that conference, I mean, I was kind of a mess. I was kind of like crying or like triggered almost at every like panel that I went to, but it was also really comforting to be surrounded by all these folks that were in the same journey as me. And by folks, I mean like women and chefs and restaurateurs. And so I would definitely encourage when that's a female identifying to sign up for the WCRA. I know they have like scholarships if you can't afford to be a member. Even when I was closing the restaurant, we would have chapter meetings, we'd have little meetups, and I would go to those, and it definitely helps remind myself that there are other people that are going through the same things that I'm going through.
Oh. Let's try that again, phone. Thank you, because it's hard to explain to people, especially if they don't work in like this particular industry, like what that's like, because it's like, it's, you know, like you're gonna start working and you might get fired off the line one day. You might, you know, you might get sent home in the middle of dinner service. Like it happens, and I think especially because as Black women, there's such little representation of us in a lot of kitchens. I mean, it's gotten better marginally, but for the most part, it's just like, you know, working in a restaurant is already hard. I was hoping like it's already like one of the most like demanding and grueling jobs you'll ever have. And so if we continue on with the understanding that, you know, Black women have to work 3 times harder than everybody else, I don't know how much harder you can work in a restaurant. So, you know, without it like completely putting you in the ground, I don't know how much harder you can make that, you know, what you can do there. And so, you know, it's like, you know, for cooks that are coming up and for like young women, and, you know, just remember, like, you just do the work because things are going to happen, and like don't expect like this journey to be a linear. It's gonna change and it's gonna look different. And you know, I had a girl who was an intern of mine in Philadelphia, and she wasn't sure, you know, her concern was that she didn't fit into restaurant culture. And so she had spent the summer working in the kitchen I was managing at that time. And by the time we left, she was like, thank you for, you know, being so generous, because I want to work in food, but I don't know if I don't know if I want to work in a restaurant. And so, you know, we had a really long conversation about other opportunities to work in culinary that aren't, you know, that, like you said, the traditional trajectory that we put people on all the time. It's like, okay, become a line cook, work your way up, you know, become a sous, become an executive chef, and then you kind of keep moving. But I was like, there's other places you can go with a culinary education. There are other spaces that need you with a culinary education. And so, you know, it's just like go easy on yourself when you find that you don't necessarily fit into the restaurant mold, because it's not for everybody. And I think
it's not, and it's hard to sit with. I mean, the last restaurant I worked for, my own restaurant, was in New York City. It was WD50, and it was a Michelin star kitchen. I was crying myself to sleep every night and waking up crying, and just like felt really anxious all day long every day. And eventually,
okay,
I was like, this is crazy. Like, I've worked hard towards this. I'm like, here I am. I'm like at the top. I'm like working with all the country's top chefs. Like, I should be happy. I should like this. And it was really hard for me to accept, like, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe this isn't, you know, and then actually part of me thought like, maybe I'm not supposed to work in like the industry, and maybe I should walk away. And it definitely was about finding those right spaces. You know, when I had the opportunity to create a space, like how to create a space that's healthy for people to feel like, you know, they can continue to nurture their passion and not want to die, you know, also while doing it. It was to figure out how to find that balance in restaurants, you know, and I think that's kind of the future of restaurants is definitely shifting in that way, because I mean, fortunately, the millennials are coming out and saying like, I don't want to work this much all the time. So,
I mean, it's just not, I don't think it's healthy. I just honestly, like, looking at the balance of like what we do when you sit back as a person who's like grown up in it, and you kind of step back and look at it again, you're just like, this is ridiculous. Like, who else is doing this like this? And like, to what end? To like burn yourself out, to like, you know, to die young, or to end up with some type of weird substance abuse problem, or like, you know, like the things people have done in order to keep the pace. And you're like, is this all really worth it? Like, is what we're doing giving us what we want at the end? And is that like, are you just trying to put up a plate of food, or are you trying to like live this life that's like fulfilling and useful to other people at this point? Like, I understand serving a plate of food.
That's what really what Mid.dle Passage is about, you know. It's like enough. I mean, yeah, we don't need to be burning ourselves out just to feed wealthy people food. If I'm going to burn myself out over something, I want to have something to be able to like use my passions and talents for something that's going to make, you know, I mean, not even a difference in other people's lives, but it's like benefiting myself as well, because it's giving a new purpose, you know. Right.
There's got to be some fulfillment here. I can't get to the end, and like, because I don't. You know, it's funny, like, to watch, like, your more notable chefs with more notoriety kind of step out of kitchens and get into other spaces, because it's like they want to tell more stories. They want to be able to spend more time with, you know, their friends and their family, and actually having a life. And simultaneously, we're still, you know, the messaging about working in the industry is still like, work yourself until you're sick or anxious or crazy, because that's the only way to get anywhere. And I'm like, that's just so untrue. And, you know, it's so like absolutely untrue that that's what you need to do to like be important or to have a voice in the industry. And I think it's just a matter of like shifting the narrative. And like you said, thankfully, I think we are seeing these little small, like nominal shifts, which essentially it's a value shift first, and then, you know, and a shift of behavior. But like the attitudes, I think for so long, like the attitudes in restaurants and working in restaurants have influenced our attitudes towards food overall as a culture. And I think as we shift away from this idea that food is commerce and back into food is nourishment, that we'll see some change in restaurants. And again, I think it's essential for Black folks to get into the industry, because we kind of naturally bring that energy with us. Like, hey, we're cooking for each other because we want to take care of one another. And if you come into one of our food spaces, that's what you're going to get. That's the vibe you're going to get. And I think the more of us that show up in the industry, the more balance we will bring to, you know, just to those attitudes towards how food is produced and how food is served. So yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, the more we show up, the more people just get used to it, and you're like, sorry, this is how it's going to go now.
They're like, oh, this is it's, you know, for me, I'm like, you know what's going to work, and you're not going to work. It's not, you're still going to work hard, but you're not out here like trying to, I just still don't understand what people are trying to prove, working that crazy. I remember like New York, I think when I started working in New York, that was my first line job. And I worked at a restaurant called the Fat Radish in Manhattan. And I started in August, and by the time Christmas came around, I swear I lost like 40 some odd pounds.
Oh, same. Yeah, I called it my WD-50 diet. I lost like 25 pounds. I was like couldn't eat.
I just like, what are you doing? I didn't realize. And what was crazy was I didn't even notice I had dropped that much weight. What was happening was I was going to work. I got off the train from Brooklyn. I was coming up the stairs to get to the street level again, and I had to keep holding my pants up, and I was like, what's? And I thought it was the pants. I don't know what was wrong with me. I don't know why it didn't occur to me that my pants were too big at that point, but I thought something had, like a zipper had broken or something. So I immediately go into like the closest store and start trying pants on. And by the time I got around to the size like 4s and those suckers fit, I was like, oh, okay, I need to go see a doctor. Like immediately thought I was sick. I was like, oh shoot, how did you lose this much weight? So I like bought the pants, got to work. And then my family, when I finally saw them again, everyone was like, hey, you doing all right? You're looking real slim. Are you sick? And I was like, no, I didn't even realize I had lost that much weight. And I just like now, you know, it's been more than a decade from that point, and I'm just like, what were you doing? Like, what were you?
And we're working on food all day, and
you don't eat.
That's
it's true. It's true. I'm just like, I remember my chef used to stop and be like, Tiff, have you eaten today? And I'm like, I think so. And you don't even think about it. It's really just a dangerous way to live in general. And it's just,
we're like not eating sitting down, or just kind of like, it's almost like part of who I am now is to stand up and eat. Exactly. I can sit at a table. It's so okay.
Oh my God. And it creates these terrible life habits. And you're just like, I have got to break myself of this habit of like thinking I only have 20 minutes to sit down and eat, or, if your brain just won't pause and go, okay, you can take care of yourself for the next 30 minutes. It's okay. So in these last few moments, I've been asking everybody, and the answers have been pretty incredible, to, if you had an opportunity to create one of your very last meals on this side of life, what would you absolutely have to have? Like, what would have to be on the table? And now that other people have answered it this way, and then how would you want it served? Would you want it served in courses, or would you want everything on the table at one time?
Wow. So I'm sorry, am I eating this or am I serving this dish?
You are eating it for sure. And then how would you want it served to you? Would you want it served in in courses, or would you want it served all at one time?
So I don't know if it's a guilty pleasure, but it's my pleasure in life is going out for like rustic Italian food. And I definitely love eating in courses. And so I would definitely want some sort of like burrata cheese with tomatoes to start. And then probably like 4 different types of pasta, like something stuffed, like a agnolotti, something like a pappardelle, maybe with a lamb ragu, for sure bolognese. I love Alfredo. I always appreciate something chocolatey at the end. I love wine throughout. So yeah, I would say like a nice gluttonous meal of like heavy pastas and wine and chocolate.
Yes. That's all I'm saying. As soon as you said cheese, I'm like, yep, cheese. Yeah, we're going to need cheese to start, cheese throughout. Thank you very much. Oh my goodness. Every time I ask a question, the answers are just they're so interesting, because it just gives you a small window into someone's like comfort food space, and like what makes them feel like at home and secure. And like, if you're eating a last meal, you want to just have a moment and just go, okay. It's just, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And girl, that I'm like, you said my last meal, but it's like, that's this meal that I like order all the time at this restaurant.
I understand
myself, that. You're like, it's okay. I'll take this home.
So just while I have these last few moments with you, just remind everybody of the Instagram pages, and then if you have a Twitter handle or something like that, throw that out there too, so we can all just keep up with what you're doing, and when you start releasing some work that we can all read and get our hands on.
Awesome. Yeah. So the blog is Martha's Daughter. That's at Martha's Daughter on Instagram. And then for the Black Farm Dinners, that's at Mid.dle Passage. It's Mid.dle Passage. On Twitter, I am at Nyanyika Mary. So every now and then I post on Twitter. I'm not very good about it.
Man, Twitter is hard. I'm sorry. Twitter is hard. I thought all the other ones would be, but Twitter is a challenge. You're just like, I either don't want to say anything to you about something, or I have a tangent. I don't have the in between. I don't do 160 characters. I'm sorry.
Right. And then how can we be clever all the time?
Apparently that platform is not for me yet. I don't have the discipline, so it's fine. But thank you so much for hopping on. I know that you are current.
Oh man, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for what you're doing. I think it's so important. Like I said, when I saw the blog, it like spoke to me and made me feel like, oh my gosh, there's someone doing this already. We have like a community going. People's voices are being heard. I think it's really great.
Thank you so much. I know. I'm like, every time I sit down and like try to edit an episode.
Thank you for listening to this week's interview. We hope you enjoyed it. With the thousands of podcasts out there, we are honored that you've chosen to listen to ours. Be sure to catch up on all of season 1, then come back every week for new episodes. Visit the Afros and Knives website to get connected to our social media, to buy merch, and to become a patron of the show. Afros and Knives is a listener-supported podcast, and funding is provided by our Patreon members. Be sure to download and subscribe to the show, and we'll talk to you next week.